All right, guys. Looks like we are live. We give this a moment to boot up on the interwebs. Specifically talking to you, Rumble. Uh, in any case, today, folks, is going to be a continuation of some of the discussion we had last week that I meant to get all in one stream. It was just nearly impossible, and that is the last man versus the inner man. And we are going to talk specifically about simulation and simulacrum of Baudrillard, as well as Jung's psychology in alchemy. So that will all be right after the intro here on All Minus One. All right, welcome. This is All Minus One. My name is Bill. Thanks for joining us today. Sorry if when I came back after the intro there, that welcome was extremely loud. I didn't say that super loud, but StreamYards loves to bump up the volume, uh, and I don't know what to do about that. In any case, with that, I rewatched the video from last week, or most of it, I should say. I don't think I finished it, but there were points of echoes coming across, and I did see something in the chat about that. You guys got to let me know about those things. Very well could be my mic, even though it's not a multi-directional mic. It is supposed to be me talking right into it or right over it. But it might be picking up from my system. I keep my volume low. I prefer not to wear earphones and stuff. Those things bother my ears. They get sore. I don't like it. I do have a headset that does bone induction, which basically transmits the vibrations of the sound waves through the bone into your ear, and you can hear perfectly fine that way. That would make the mic go away because it has a little mic unto itself. But I don't know if that um, would be a good workaround, good solution. And I also don't know if I could wear something like that for that long because I have issues with stuff like that. It's like, don't get me wrong. I've, spent my life carrying gear and things, but yeah, it doesn't mean that I'm not like constantly aware of how annoying it is. There was a time where I worked, I worked when I was in the Marines on a flight line, security, very high asset, deal, and they wanted us to have earpieces. And suddenly we went from having open comms with no one around to having earpieces so people couldn't overhear our conversations. They got someone to come in to mold the thing, some specialist, and I can tell you by the end of an 8-hour shift, your ear is screaming. It's not comfortable, at least with the technology back in those days. So in any case, I don't know. I'll figure that out. But hey, I got some good news. I got a car. I needed a car. And that kept me from streaming last Thursday and the Thursday before because both those days I was getting the car. And my wife had some business in DC and I had the baby, so it was going to really be impossible. But I got that situation solved and very happy with my new vehicle, even though it's not a new vehicle, it's a used vehicle, but it's new to me and it's in great condition, even though it has somewhat high mileage. So I'm pretty happy about it. Got a steal as far as I'm concerned, and I got myself a pimp ride basically. So it does it's not a Scooby. One of these days, I'm gonna get me a Hawkeye like WRX STI, and it's gonna be sweet, and it's gonna be a clutch because screw that automatic stuff. I bought an automatic for the first time in my life. I've never bought an automatic car, but I bought an automatic. Scratch that. I think I did have a car I bought some years ago with my ex-wife. It might have been an automatic, but I don't think so. This one is, but again, I needed a car to get the same car or a similar car. Uh, I would had to go on all the way up to Philly, 4 hours away, to get a clutch, and they just don't make them. That's how it goes. But let's get into the subject matter here, guys. Enough about me. Let's talk about you. Actually, before I do that, let's real quick tell everybody, hey, go over to Rumble, subscribe over there. Go to the DLive if you wish. Go to the Entropies. Those are all places that are alternatives to YouTube, specifically Rumble, because Rumble has a live streaming capability and the show must go on. So if YouTube decides to yeet me, they decide to block anything, well, it's their own funeral. As far as I'm concerned, it's not going to stop me from doing what I am doing. It's not going to stop me from speaking. There is nothing that YouTube can do other than gatekeep on their platform, unless they're going to send men in black suits to my house to come get me or something. It, I'm going to keep doing this, and they can make up whatever excuses about violations and whatever petty things that they say all the time. I there's a viable alternative that is kicking their butt, and you watch if their shares go tremendously down, kind of like Twitter and Rumble keeps rising, becomes more powerful and outpaces them. You watch, YouTube will all of a sudden change all of their all hey, I just got a black screen there from StreamYard. Hopefully you guys didn't see that. We're watching the playback right now. We'll see. Ah, it froze. Okay. How long before it comes back? There it is. All right. So, all right, that's 10 minutes of intro and talking about nonsense. Let's get into it. So, guys, as was presenting to you last week with Baudrillard, right? Or excuse me, with The Last Man and the Synthesized Society, I started to, at the end, speak of Baudrillard. Now, I've been using terminology that Baudrillard uses here and there and have briefly touched on his ideas, but basically, he is most famous for his book Simulation and Simulacra. And so what I've done is I've gotten some
The simulacrum is never what hides the truth.
some audio from YouTube, and actually, man, that reminds me, I need to give credit to this guy. I did this last week. Find the video clip real quick, or the channel, I mean. You gotta remember, guys, I put this together weeks ago, and have just been unable to get it on. Oh, so this is the other reading that we're going to be listening to, because I'm going to combine these ideas. I'm going to explain these things, break them down a little bit more for you. And the channel is Alt Shift Triple Z. And this guy just goes through and reads live, I'm assuming as some sort of challenge, these books. And so, because I'm a dyslexic, and I get stumbly caught up on my words, I'm going to use this guy as an aid. He's got lots of books here. Lots of books. And right there is simulation and simulacra. However, at any point, if we want to get into specifics, we really want to look at the details, right? I do have the PDF. And the first line that he read there is, the simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is the truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. Ecclesiastes. And I think that this is a jab from Baudrillard, right? He's explaining, this is the summation of his book, that this is not an Ecclesiastes at all. And he's saying that the simulacrum, what is false, that it's divorced from what is understood. Well, that is actually the truth. Sorry, guys, this thing's a little testy. Just jumped on me. The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is the truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. So let's listen to this audio, and I'll be stopping it. We'll be talking about it. We'll be going over these ideas. This is going to be somewhat heavy stuff, guys.
It is truth.
Intellectually challenging. Hopefully, it will be intellectually stimulating as well.
Hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true. Ecclesiastes. If once we were able to view the Borgia's fable, in which the cartographers of the empire draw up a map so detailed that it ends up covering the territory exactly, The decline of the empire witnesses the fraying of this map little by little, and its fall into ruins, though some shreds are still discernible in the deserts. The metaphysical beauty of this ruined abstraction testifying to a pride equal to the empire and rotting it like a carcass, returning to the
By the way, that little thing up in the corner, it says YouTube 0 because he does live streams. People come in on the live streams, of course. It's kind of funny to read the comments on the live streams because they're like, "What is this guy doing? What's he reading? Da 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 da. Why is he doing this?" It's amusing, at least to me.
substance of the soil, a bit as the double ends by being confused with the real through aging. As the most beautiful allegory of simulation, this fable has now come full circle for us, and possesses nothing but the discreet charm of second-order simulacra. Today, abstraction is no longer that of the map, the double, the mirror, or the concept. Simulation is no longer that of a territory, a referential being, or a substance. It is the generation by models of a real, without origin or reality, a hyperreal. The territory no longer precedes the map, nor does it survive it. It is nevertheless the map that precedes the territory, procession of simulacra, that engenders the territory. And if one must return to the fable, today it is the territory whose shreds slowly rot across the extent of the map.
All right, let's go through that. Let's get a little broken down here. If once we're able to view the Borges fable in which the cartographers of the empire draw up a map so detailed that it ends up covering the territory exactly, the decline of the empire witnesses the fraying of this map little by little, and it falls into ruins, though some shreds are still discernible in the deserts. The metaphysical beauty of this ruined abstraction testifying to a pride equal to the empire and a rotting like a carcass returning to the, subs, the substance of the soil, a bit as the double ends by being confused with the real through aging. As the most beautiful allegory of simulation, this fable has now come full circle for us and possesses nothing but the discreet charm of the second order simulacra. And what he is saying about this is that the map becomes it's so perfect because the only way to have a true map, right, is to have a one-to-one scale, one-to-one relationship to be truly accurate. And if that were the case, it would also have to decay and fray as the empire does. Why is that? Because, well, the empire has to maintain it, of course. And as that frays and falls apart, as the empire does, the representation of the empire, being the map, and the empire are falling apart together. But the map becomes more important than the empire itself, essentially, right? So right after that, he says, today's abstraction is no longer that of the map, the double, the mirror, or the concept. Simulation is no longer that of a territory, a referential being, or a substance. It is the generation by models of a real without origin or reality, a hyper real. So, this is the concept of hyper reality, that there is no origin or reality to what the simulacra is, meaning whatever the belief is, whatever the sign is, whatever the symbol is, the meaning was created later, way after the origins of it, right? The meaning was imposed upon it. And generally, as I've been talking, it's synthetic, it's made up, it's something that is fed to us. And it is the last man who eats this up, this person who is synthesized because, well, all they care about is fitting into the world in the comfort of the world and the society and putting on a facade for who they are. And I'm going to show you an actual example of this. If I can get my mouse on the right screen. So this, now I'm in no way affiliated with this company. Nor do I get ad money from them. But Path, if you want to sponsor me, hey, could always use more money in the pocket. There are things I'd like to get done. There are things I need to do. This, my friends, is a bottle of Path water. It's alkaline, purified water with electrolytes with a pH of 9.5, which you can go read up on pHs of water and stuff. It's interesting. It's tasty, but it's not Path water that's inside there. No, I drank the water that was inside this a very, very long time ago, several weeks ago, but it's an aluminum bottle. It's an aluminum water bottle, and for that reason, I have kept it. What's inside of it right now is Topo Chico, which is carbonated mineral water. And that's just a simple example of, the inner versus the outer. You would assume that this was what it says it is on the outside, right? But when you go to open it and you go to taste it, it's not the same. There's something different inside. The reality is different than the exterior. So, and I didn't come up with this clever little analogy, guys, like to show you. I didn't do this on purpose. I actually have been carrying this stuff at work. I've been taking these bottles and taking 2 bottles of Topo Chico and throwing it in here, and I take 2 of these, and then I have 4 of them, and then I have water to sip throughout the day. And because it's carbonated, I can't slam it because I don't drink carbonated stuff a lot. So that keeps me from just, pushing too much water, which is not good for you. And so this is what I've been doing, and I thought about that today, and I thought, yeah, of course. It's a simple analogy, but it's how it works. So let's get back to the video reader, and we'll get more into this.
It is the real, and not the map, whose vestiges persist here and there in the deserts that are no longer those of the Empire, but ours, the desert of the real itself. In fact, even inverted, Borges' fable is unusable. Only the allegory of the Empire, perhaps, remains. Because it is with this same imperialism that present-day simulators attempt to make the real, all of the real, coincide with their models of simulation. But it is no longer a question of either maps or territories. Something has disappeared. The sovereign difference between one and the other that constituted the charm of abstraction. Because it is difference that constitutes the poetry of the map and the charm of the territory, the magic of the concept and the charm of the real. This imaginary of representation, which simultaneously culminates in and is engulfed by the cartographer's mad project of the ideal coextensivity of map and territory, disappears in the simulation whose operation is nuclear and genetic, no longer at all specular or discursive. It is all of metaphysics that is lost. No more mirror of being and appearances, of the real and its concept. No more imaginary coextensivity. It is genetic miniaturization that is the dimension of simulation. The real is produced from miniaturized cells, matrices, and memory banks, modes of control, and it can be reproduced an indefinite number of times from these. It no longer needs to be rational, because it no longer measures itself against either an ideal or negative instance. It is no longer anything but operational. In fact, it is no longer really the real, because no imaginary envelops it anymore. It is a hyperreal, produced from a radiating synthesis of combinatory models in a hyperspace without atmosphere.
So, if I had a means to have the words up here and allow someone else to read it, that would be great. But I don't. But I can let someone read it, who reads quite well, and then go through it again. And this is the paragraph that he's in. So he says, in fact, in inverting Borges' fable is unusable. Only the allegory of the empire perhaps remains, because it is with the same imperialism that present-day simulators attempt to make the real. So understand that. It is with the same imperialism that present day simulators attempt to make the real. These are the things that I talk about all of the time. The people that wish to control how you think and feel about everything, right? These are the sick men, the homonosos, who are in the media, who are in Hollywood, who are the presenters of this lavish lifestyle and all of the moral entrapments that make up what is leftism and the superstructure. And we call it leftism because we're looking at it from a perspective, and that perspective is from the French Revolution and basically, those who wish to collectivize totally and those who do not. And they do, from their perspective, see everyone who does not wish to collectivize totally as a rightist. You are on the right, period. As our friend Don the Pleb says, if you're right of Mao, then you're right wing. You're all conservatives by their book. They talk about all this non-binary stuff when it comes to the sexes or the gender fluidity stuff, the queer stuff. They talk about all of that, but they were very binary people when it comes to this aspect, and they will excise their own people. They will cast them out because, well, you didn't believe properly. You didn't believe the way you were supposed to. You didn't bow down and worship the cult when it changed. You started to think. How dare you, Winston? Remember, it's Misha Brzezinski's job to let you know what to think. It says, of all the real coincidence with their models of simulation, but it is no longer a question of either maps or territories. Something has disappeared. The sovereign difference between one and the other that constitute the charm of abstraction. Now, the charm of abstraction, in part, presents paradoxes, and this is where the metaphysical or the mystical lives. This is where this religious aspect remains, and we are going to very specifically talk about that here when we get into psychology and alchemy from Carl Jung. And the way this is going to go today, guys, is we're going to, not to overwhelm you, we're going to bounce between these ideas, bounce between these works. We're only going to look really at the very beginnings of these works, and it as more of an introduction, but I'm going to show you how I relate the ideas, right? And again, this is all the work that I've been doing to write the book, The Synthetic Society, and where these ideas are stemming from and coming from, and from me. By the way, again, if you hear any background noise, I guess my daughter just jumped in the shower and turned on the radio, so hopefully you don't hear that. You're on Entropy Stream Violence? Aha! There you are. That is part of our reality. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I don't, by the way, I don't really keep DLive up. I used to do that a long time ago. It, like, stresses my system. So, um and then it's like I'll get random chats in there, but the thing is with the DLive videos, you can chat later, while long, after the videos are up, and of course, you have to pay to keep your videos up. They get deleted within, like, a week or 2 or something like that. So, um, and they did some things after, J6, the most infamous day ever in American history. They did some stuff I didn't like, so I use them, but I'm not really promoting them. I'll put it that way. All right, so just wanted to find my spot here. Something has disappeared, the sovereign difference between one and the other, that constitution, the charm of abstraction. Because it is because it is difference that constitutes the poetry of the map and the charm of the territory, the magic of the concept and the charm of the real. This imaginary of representation, which simulation accumulates in and is engulfed by the cartographer's mad project of the ideal coextensivity of the map and territory. What he's saying, of course, is that the ideal of having a one-for-one scale of a map. This appears in the simulation, whose operation is nuclear and genetic. So, what does that mean? Well, it's nuclear and genetic, meaning it is the fundamental base roots of things. It is on the atomic scale, right? It is ingrained in the code. He says that's no longer at all specular or discursive. It is all of metaphysics that is lost. No more mirrors of being and appearance of the real and its concept. No more imaginary extensivity. This is again why I got someone else to read this, right? But I'm going to pick out certain paragraphs, of course. It is genetic miniaturization that is the demise of simulation. The real is produced from miniaturized cells, matrices, and memory banks, models of control, and it can be reproduced an infinite number of times from these. It no longer needs to be rational because it no longer measures itself against either an ideal or negative instance, meaning the simulation, right, and the simulacra don't need to be logical. This, in part, is why the left doesn't need logic on their side. They just need you to bow down to the cult because they own the science, right? They produce everything. Follow the science, follow the science. It doesn't matter that the science changes every 5 minutes. It doesn't matter that the science is constantly wrong. It doesn't matter that they're not actually practicing science. They're practicing opinion making based on careers that generally have no actual like practical experience. And then those folks who have had practical experience are, of course, shut down. Isn't that funny how that works? Because it's not about anything but controlling you, right? Let me see if I can find my Dystopia Now video. Perhaps I can upload it. Can always change my branding real quick. Yeah. So let's check this out real quick because this passage from 1984 sums this up quite well. Actually, that's not the original. I bet I can find it. It's somewhere. I play with looping those two things together. That's Queens of the Stone Age, or a remix of one of their songs. Let me YouTube's it. By the way, that's a channel, man. I will do great things with. I can get some help. There's just not enough time for me to do editing and all that kind of stuff I'd like to do. I mean, if I had a higher skill level with it, it wouldn't be a thing, but I don't. So Let me boom. Boom. Got it. Finally. Let me get myself back. All right. Get some volume here.
Power is in inflicting pain and humiliation. Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Do you begin to see then what kind of world we are creating? It is the exact opposite of the stupid hedonistic utopias that the old reformers imagined. A world of fear and treachery and torment, a world of trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will grow not less but more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress toward more pain. The old civilizations claimed that they were founded on love and justice. Ours is founded upon hatred. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy. Everything. Already we are breaking down the habits of thought which have survived from before the revolution. We have cut the links between child and parent, and between man, and between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. But in the future there will be no wives and no friends. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality, like the renewal of a ration card. We shall abolish the orgasm. Our neurologists are at work upon it now. There will be no loyalty except loyalty toward the boy. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother. There will be no laughter except a laugh of triumph over a defeated enemy. There will be no art, no literature, no science. When we are omnipotent, we shall have no more need of science. There will be no distinction between beauty and ugliness. There will be no curiosity, no employment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
Welcome to the archive. One of these days, I'll get back to this.
Welcome to the archive. Being the year 2084, we all love and know the greatness and perfection of our dystopia. As such, we all have a grand duty to continue in our great endeavor. Those of us who are looking after you wish to provide a history of our society, as well as a step-by-step guide for achieving the goals of totalitarianism that led to such levels of human perfection. Welcome to Dystopia Now.
Yeah. So that was that. That's a 3-minute and 30-second video. That took me, I don't know, 3 days to get to do. I didn't work at it straight for 3 days, but I had to collect the images, the GIFs, had to organize them, order them, had to make the transitions, fade in and out the music, do the voiceover, the voice distortion for it, all the stuff. Again, it's not that I can't do these things, it's that it's time consuming for me, which is why I don't do them. I would love to do edited videos. It's storytelling is in my bones, even though I'm not as a speaker, I don't think I'm that great of a storyteller. storytelling is something that I've always wanted to do. You know, when I was young, I wanted to be a film director. Um, I love writing, and and in part, writing is therapeutic for me, and it's therapeutic for most people if you do it correctly. But let's get back to the subjects at hand here. By the way, if you're not subscribed at Dystopia now, go over there because I will pick that back up one day. May not be anytime soon, but it will come back. I promise. Because it's a I if you didn't know, I really like satire too, guys. And the more that satire can fly under the radar, the better. So that's what that channel really is. All right, let me get my tab back up here. So where were we at here? Let's talking about no more mirror. Yeah. The real is produced from miniaturized cells, matrices, and memory banks, models of control, and it can be reproduced an infinite number of times from these. It no longer needs to be rational because it no longer measures itself against either an ideal or negative instance. It is no longer anything but operational. In fact, it is no longer really the real because no imagery envelops it anymore. Or is that imaginary envelops it anymore? It is a hyperreal produced from a radiating synthesis of combinatory models in a hyperspace without atmosphere. And of course, the atmosphere being the substance, right? The mood, the place in which we reside. What are the things around it? He's saying it has no atmosphere. It's a hyperspace. It's a space between what we call the real world, the projected world of the outer three dimension or outer four dimensions. Of course, there's an argument here as well. You start getting into notions of space time and all that, which is dead, by the way. If you didn't know, space time's dead. But if it is. I'm laughing at it because I think that it's funny to say that, and people are like, "What are you talking about, man?" Well, I told you to watch some videos last Tuesday that you should check out about consciousness, about conscious agent model, Douglas Hoffman's work, and other people, neurologists. People were starting to understand that consciousness is the foundations of the universe, which has always been known. That's what the religious side of things has always spoke to. But yeah, there is this idea of space-time if we look at it as a stretched, let's say a stretched piece of fabric, right? That's really taut, a little bit elastic, and you put something heavy in it, and what happens? Well, it sinks in the middle, right? And because of that, then things come down and they float around that heavy object. Further, this is described as a straight object, like a straight line, rolling around on a cylinder or a cone. This is the effect of gravity in the space-time model of Einsteinian theory, right? So that is a perspective. It's a way of examining and thinking of the universe. It is different than Newtonian physics, but yet both work and both apply. Why does that happen? Well, because they're not realities. They're abstractions. And in this idea of space-time, why is it the object that creates the imprint? Maybe it's the imprint that creates the object. These are the rabbit holes that you have to go down through to understand how fabricated everything seems to be, how synthetic it is. In any case, I'm going to hit the play button on the video, and we're going to listen to a couple more minutes of this. He's just basically going to get to the next section here, which is the divine inferences of images. And I believe the way I'd set this up is I'm not going necessarily in order of the book. By the way, this book is like 100 pages or something like that. So this is kind of the density and brevity in which I'm trying to present my ideas as well as I'm writing. But yeah, I'm not going to follow just, I think, maybe I do, maybe I don't. I don't remember. Again, I set this up weeks. I set this up well over a month ago now. But yeah, I think I'm going to jump around a little bit in the beginning here, but we're only reading the first few portions of this. So let's get back to the narrator.
By crossing into a space whose curvature is no longer that of the real nor that of truth, the era of simulation is inaugurated by a liquidation of all referentials. Worse, with their artificial resurrection in the systems of signs, a material more malleable than meaning, in that it lends itself to all systems of equivalences, to all binary oppositions, to all combinatory algebra. It is no longer a question of imitation, nor duplication, nor even parody. It is a question of substituting the signs of the real for the real. That is to say, of an operation of deterring every real process via its operational double. A programmatic, metastable, perfectly descriptive machine that offers all the signs of the real and short-circuits all its vicissitudes. Never again will the real have the chance to produce itself. Such is the vital function of the model in a system of death, or rather of anticipated resurrection, that no longer even gives the event of death a chance. A hyperreal henceforth sheltered from the imaginary, and from any distinction between the real and the imaginary, leaving room only for the orbital recurrence of models, and for the simulated generation of differences.
All right, so we'll cover that real quick again to get that in your mind, right? Again, if I had time, I thought about this, but it's far more intense. I would have taken and made a video of the reading with the words, but time being what it is, and a lot of my time the last week and a half was trying to get a new car, which I was successful at and very happy about. So, by crossing into space whose curvature is no longer that of the real, nor that of truth, the era of simulation is inaugurated by a liquidation of all referentials. And this is, again, Milan Kundera from the Book of Laughter. If you want to liquidate a people, you take away their history. It's one of my favorite quotes. Of course, I'm paraphrasing there, but you guys have heard me talk about it numerous times. I don't need to pull it up. So the liquidation of all referentials means that then you can impose your new morality onto this, right? This is Herbert Marcuse now that I'm thinking of specifically. And this is what the new left wanted to do. But this is always what they've wanted to do. The left has always tried to implement this new morality. That's what the French Revolution was about. It's even, to some degree, what the American Revolution was about. But they went differently because the American Revolution wasn't trying to impose anything upon anyone. They were trying to liberate themselves from something. There's a difference in those two things. Liberation, being free from something, is a natural process, in fact. If you wish to liberate yourself from your parents as an adult, then I would say you are you are a mature adult, because you shouldn't be held by the bonds of your parents. Don't get me wrong. You can love your parents and you can be concerned that you might disappoint them in some ways or another, or that they might not approve of things in your life. But in the end, that you are to go off into the world and make your own way, and they cannot always be around. And so there's a sense of stagnating uh, in the puritanical aspects of Christian morality, right? I'm not talking about like actual Christianity. I'm talking about Puritanism specifically, and this is very much related to the United States because Puritanism had a great influence on the North specifically, and that Puritanism is in part carried on in our ethos and our minds into today, which is part of the scientism of, the Puritanism of scientism. So, right, think about that. Like you have to be this very, everyone has to be in line in the society, and there's all this repressed feelings and crazy stuff going on in the background because no one's actually living quite authentically. Some people maybe, but a lot of people aren't. And of course, we know the Salem witch trials came out of that Puritanism. Again, how is it any different today? It reminds me of the one of the first episodes. I think it was the first episode Tank and I did. Might have been the first episode we were live on. I don't recall. There there were some experimental times, folks. But we read a Curtis Yarvin article, and it was talking about the witch hunts and all that. Of course, he wrote this way back in like 2011, and Tank thought it would be interesting to talk about on the show because he was all into him. That was my first exposure to Yarvin, actually. And then all of a sudden, I read that, and it's almost like the world's totally linked up because it was all over my YouTube. All of a sudden, he started coming up, and I can't think of his alias when he went by, but anyways, you guys should know. He's what all the based monarchist Nazis praise all the time. So, but anyways, I'm not saying all those people that like Yarvin are Nazis or monarchists, but he does himself, or at least he used to push that forward. Artificial resurrection of systems and signs. So this is the worse with their artificial resurrection of systems and signs. That is replacing the old systems and the old signs with new ones. So the 1619 project, right? Very specifically that, or Howard Zimm's whatever History of America. I always forget the title of his book because it's not really worth noting other than its influence. And it's a book of a bunch of lies. There's actually a really good, I really like this, what is it, The Untold History of America by Oliver Stone. You can watch it on Amazon. I really like that documentary. It's really wrong and it's really messed up. And Oliver Stone really gives all the progressives a lot of credit and saying how they were good people. And I'm thinking, no, they weren't. But I do like that documentary because it shows you when you start having that perspective, how rosy you make the world out to be and how you favor your gods. A material more malleable than meaning in that it lends itself to all systems of equivalences. A material more malleable than meaning. Meaning's important. I want to talk about that if I get a chance to some degree today. If not, maybe we'll do it Tuesday. Hey, because I got a car now, I might actually be able to stream on Thursday. Keep talking about it. Hasn't happened yet, but look out for that. To all binary oppositions. Yeah, think about that. To all combinatory algebra or integration, because that's what algebra is doing, right? You're integrating, you're balancing the equations. It is no longer a question of imitation, nor duplication, nor even parity. It is a question of substituting the signs of the real for the real. That is to say, of an operation of deterring every real process being its operational double, a programmatic, metastable, perfectly descriptive machine that offers all the signs of the real and short circuits all of its vicissitudes. So this is my harping on about the external world and the anti-social media and how that you should use this novelty of technology. I'm not a Luddite, guys. I'm not Uncle Ted, but use it wisely. Use it with caution. Understand that it has pitfalls and downfalls, and that those things are going to be hyper realized in the near future with the so-called metaverse. The Wachowskis decided to make the Matrix movie and told everybody on the set to read this book. They said that it was the Matrix. Now, Baudrillard was alive when the Matrix came out, and he said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. But in part it is. In part it is. Because what he's talking about is the world being simulated around us. He didn't say that we were being ruled by machines, although that is a potential of our future, you know. I mean, if I'm wrong about Christ and he never returns and all that, that's our most certain future. That or cybernetics, transhumanism, that is our most certain future. And if you don't get the chip, you don't get the parts, well, it's like Gattaca, Ethan Hawke. Have you ever seen that movie? It's a great movie. It's a phenomenal science fiction movie. And it's about people that use gene editing like CRISPR for their children, and people have religious or moral objections to it. And there is there's a guy that's trying to go to space, and he's smart enough, he can do all the things, but he doesn't have the proper genes because he wasn't edited, he was natural. And so there has to be a way around that, of course, in which in the end, more or less, I don't want to give away the ending. Spoiler alert, guys. I'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In the end, just about everyone's in on the system of the rigging. So, yeah, there's a lot of other stuff in there. It's a really, really good movie. Whoever wrote that was quite thoughtful in their ability to storytell. So never again will the real have a chance to produce itself in the vital function of the model in a system of death, or rather of anticipation or anticipated resurrection that no longer gives the event of death a chance. So here you're saying even death has been taken away. This is kind of heavy stuff, right? A hyperreality henceforth sheltered from the imagery and from any distinction between the real and the imagery, leaving room only for the orbital recurrence of models and for the simulated generation of differences. When we don't live in the inner man, we don't live in the self. The self is the regulator of the 8 dimensions that you live in. It is a dimension unto itself. It is unique and wholly individuated. And the veil of this world, the exterior world, the height, width, depth, and time is mediated with the internal self, that is the body, soul, and spirit, with the self. The self is the thing that mediates all of those. It balances between the two. What isn't known, we could call unconscious, right? But it still operates in the background of us. It still makes us move and do things and puts us in predicaments and situations. There's something that is, as the Christians would call it, temptation. There's something that's driving us, the demons that make us do bad things, that make us snap at people when we have some sort of stressful situation. And in Christianity, there's the concept of bringing all things that are hidden to the light, that are in the dark, right? Because this is a reflection of what God did in creating the universe. And all those things that are unconscious, we are supposed to bring forward in light as well. Hey, Holly, what's up? Just came in from the garden. Yeah, guys, today's a
The simulacrum.
deep one. Let me get this down. That's actually not what I meant to do. I meant to bring up the next video. So with all that, and with the unconscious, we're going to talk about Carl Jung, one of the great minds of the 20th century and 20th century psychology. And some people think Jung is kind of whacked out or whatever. And I think those people have no imagination. They have no imagination nor ability to truly understand, nor do they care to understand. If you read his simplest book, his book for the layperson, The Undiscovered Self, it becomes quite clear what Carl Jung is trying to do. He's trying to keep people from being indoctrinated by collective cultism. And that collective cultism is what is driving things right now. It's the synthetic society. It is the synthesis of the people into a system in which is brought down by a superstructure placed upon them. It is the simulation and simulacra that Baudrillard is talking about. It is the deposits of things that are completely unreal as truth and a manipulation of them. And I believe this to be true. I don't think Baudrillard's wrong. I think that this is why, of course, I'm always going back to the root of things and trying to understand how the people thought in those times, what they really meant, and not just project my 21st century ideals onto their 18th century or 19th century or 17th or 15th or whatever, how far back to the first century beliefs. That's improper. That's hubristic. And we can take the ideas that we have, we can take the things that we've discovered, and we can map them onto those things, right? We can connect some dots, but it's not correct to say, well, I believe because today people act this way. And what do we see on the left? Well, LGBTQ people were always around. It's like, well, yeah, no, you don't understand. They made a large portion of the population, and they were oppressed. No, they weren't. They were just integrated with society. And so they'll come up with these things like the female Viking warrior, who was probably a hermaphrodite, probably had Klinefelter syndrome, and who was a very large woman, man, whatever, and had a sword and whatever else. And it's like, yeah, you're going to find out throughout history. I mean, Joan of Arc existed. That was not that long ago, comparatively to most of history. Joan of Arc wasn't necessarily some beastly woman, And of course, there's Brienne of Tarth. It's a Game of Thrones reference for those who don't know. But yeah, I mean that exists. Does that mean that we have to then embrace that all of society is set that way? No, because there's a thing called a norm. It's a bell curve, right? The norm is where most everyone exists, except for 10% on either side. And that 10% just fractionates even more and more the more extreme things go. That 10% jumps from 10% to 2%, like that. And that 2% jumps to what is it? 0.000000001% really quickly. So how do we frame the world? Well, we don't frame the world based on those fringes on the bell curve. We frame the world based on the bell curve itself in the center. What is the average? What is the norm? Why do we do that? Because we can't operate or navigate the world by basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You have to have examples. You have to have an area to aim at. You have to have some sort of stability. But they don't want that, right? They can't synthesize you if things are stable.
The labors of the doctor, as well as the quest of the patient, are
all right, let's see. First off, let me get this up. So, Carl Jung's Psychology and Alchemy, which is a really nifty book. Let's see here. Let's get down to it. Again, some of these things will be out of order. But we are basically just going through the introductions of these. See, there's a lot of references in the front here. 705 pages, guys. Not of references. Jung wrote a lot. Apparently not as much as L. Ron Hubbard, though. I don't know if I buy that. That goes around. L. Ron Hubbard has written more than anyone else in the world ever. I don't know if I believe that. Okay, this is where I believe we shall be at. Or at least somewhere abouts in here's. The bruised reed he shall not break, and the smoking flax he shall not quench. Now, let's get with it.
Towards that hidden and as yet unmanifest whole man, who is at once the greater and the future man. But the right way to wholeness is made up, unfortunately, of fateful detours and wrong turnings.
So for context, what is Jung talking about? He is talking about how psychologists, doctors, try to fix broken people. Just context there, right? A lot of people are broken because our society is synthetic. A lot of people don't develop that inner man. So Jung addresses that specifically.
It is a longissima via, not straight, but snake-like, a path that unites the opposites in the manner of the guiding Cordaeus. Caduceus, a path whose labyrinthine twists and turns are not...
I think he means, what is it, Caduceus?
Not lacking
yeah, I
in
think that's what he's talking
terrors.
about.
It is on this longissima via that we meet with those experiences which are said to be inaccessible. Their inaccessibility really consists in the fact that they cost us an enormous amount of effort. They demand the very thing we most fear, namely the wholeness, which we talk about so glibly, and which lends itself to endless theorizing, though in actual life we give it the widest possible berth. It is infinitely more popular to go in for compartment psychology, where the left-hand pigeonhole does not know what is in the right. I am afraid that we cannot hold the unconsciousness and impotence of the individual entirely responsible for this state of affairs. It is due also to the general psychological education of the European. Not only is this education the proper concern of the ruling religions, it belongs to their very nature, for religion excels all rationalistic systems in that it alone relates to the outer and inner man in equal degree.
Yes. And so Jung here is being favorable to those who aren't developed. I'm not going to be so favorable to them. But the reason why this happens is because we've accepted a society that is purely external. For those of you joining later in the show, I'm going to once again make this little analogy here. This is not a sponsorship, but hey, Path Water, if you want to sponsor me. I'm drinking out of a Path Water bottle. No, I have been. I've been using these for work, right? You would assume that the exterior would match the interior, but the interior is not Path Water. The interior is Topo Chico. And why? Well, I bought that some weeks ago, and I was like, oh man, this is sweet. It's aluminum, because I drink from plastic, guys, but I try not to do the plastic thing that often. Glass and aluminum's where it's at. So I was like, cool. And then been trying to drink more mineral water in general, and especially if it's carbonated, because I don't drink soda often. I can't slam carbonated water because I'm a Marine, and every job I've ever had, I sweat my butt off, and I know how to chug water, and that's not good. And the reason why it's not good is because you flush out all of your electrolytes if you overhydrate. So there's a madness to my thinking, of course. There's something there, and that, okay, I can't drink carbonated water so fast, so I can sip it, which is better for you, generally speaking, unless you're absolutely parched, right? But there are times where I've drank water too quickly and then immediately feel ill for like 10 minutes, like I'm going to throw up, That's too much of a change in your system. And so your body has that reaction. But the bigger point here is that what's here on the outer of the bottle is a lie, is it not? Does it reflect the contents inside? Is it water? Sure. But this says it's alkaline purified with electrolytes for taste. The pH of 9.5. Well, that's not what's in the bottle. What's in the bottle is a sparkling mineral water from Mexico. Mexico. And this is kind of like the inner and outer man. This is the persona versus the ego, and the shadow and the anima and the animus in Jung's system. So that's what he's addressing. And what people tend to do, even so-called religious people, is they put on a facade of who they are, and they don't live in the real. And in that, we have built this up for centuries, that the religious isn't real at all, in fact, which I disagree with, and Jung would disagree with as well as many other very intelligent people. And that you just don't understand what that is, what the religious is, because you were sold a simulacra called science. And science is real, folks. I'm not denying the measurement and study of things, the testing of theories, empirical data, but that's all that it is. It's not the foundations of reality. The foundations of reality are within consciousness. And the only thing that truly addresses that is religion. And again, if I get to stream this Thursday, we're going to really go into that, because I've been this video that I wanted to show you guys and talk about and go through, I've been wanting to do for a month as well. I just haven't been able to stream on Thursdays, basically. I streamed one time on Thursday, and I needed to talk about the Georgia Guidestones that day, because I had too many drinks the night before, I believe was the case, which I do now and again, because I don't have a shut off. The shut off is me passing out, unfortunately. And it doesn't take that many drinks for me anymore, too. It's like if I have like 6 drinks. There we go. I'm back. All right, let's listen.
We can accuse Christianity of arrested development if we are determined to excuse our own shortcomings, but I do not wish to make the mistake of blaming religion for something that is due mainly to human incompetence. I am speaking, therefore, not of the deepest and best understandings of Christianity, but of the superficialities and disastrous misunderstandings that are plain for all to see. The demand made by the imitatio Christi, that we should follow the ideal and seek to become like it, ought logically to have the result of developing and exalting the inner man. In actual fact, however, the ideal has been turned by superficial and formalistically minded believers into an external object of worship, and it is precisely this veneration for the object that prevents it from reaching down into the depths of the psyche and giving the latter a wholeness in keeping with the ideal.
So this goes back to iconography, and this relates back to, of course, simulation and simulacrum of Baudrillard. So right here from the text, page number 42 of 705, I'm afraid that we cannot hold the unconscious and impotence of the individual entirely responsible for this state of affairs. It is due also to the general psychological education of the European. Not only is this education the proper concern of the ruling religions, it belongs to their very nature. For religion excels at rationalistic systems. Religion excels all rationalistic system. I'm sorry for that misspeak there. Religion excels all rationalistic systems in that it alone relates to the outer and inner man in equal degrees. Yes. Yes. And that's why religion is part of the self. It is the ritual which you do every day. Everything you do is religious. You just don't understand that. You don't know how to abstract that out. But trust me, it is. It is a pattern of things that must be done. Jonathan Pajot talks about this as in something as simple as drinking. So I had some green tea here, some matcha, a little bit of honey in it, and there is a pattern to this. I have to lift it up to my mouth to drink it. I have to do a certain action. It's ritualistic. That same action, by the way, babies, little babies like one I have, they do it too. It's like it's in them to understand these things. And you could say, well, Bill, but they're mimicking. They don't start to really mimic till a little bit late. They mimic a little bit, don't get me wrong, like facial features, smiles, waves, that kind of stuff. My daughter's blowing kisses now. But a lot of it is actually them just figuring out, like straws. She loves to drink stuff. And my wife will usually have a container with a metal straw in it with full of water and ice and stuff, and she'll just go up to it and grab it and drink it. And she has a little cup with a straw herself, and of course a sippy cup, that kind of stuff. But we don't let her do too much of that stuff because what she do, she drinks it and she's playing with it, she's exploring it. She'll drink it and she'll go, little kids when they drink a lot real fast, and then she'll drink too much and it's fine. Then she just spits it on the floor because she's a baby. This just got water all over. There's water all over the floor, right? And she's starting to play in it. And that's, because she's exploring the world. She has that childlike mentality where she is just enamored by everything. What happens is we grow up and we become dull and we're not enamored by anything anymore. The mystical side of it, the magic of it is gone. We think we have it all figured out because we made it all external, because everything is based in nothing but material, worldly things, which, by the way, once again, science believes is most likely just a projection. And if different consciousnesses, different forms of conscious perceive things differently, then the world, the universe, the fabric of it does not look like what we believe it looks like. It only looks like what we can consciously perceive of it. Because other beings with different levels of consciousness can see more. Like the example of, so we have three units that allow us to see color. And there are some women, specifically, you can look this up. They have four. They have four different, I forget what it's called specifically, but they have four different genes or neurons or whatever it is to see color. Not 3, 4. Meaning that they literally see with a different form of consciousness. They literally see different colors, different dimensions of colors than you and I. Let's see here, chat. The Hari said, a subconsciousness of real virtue and morality that many non-religious people practice because it's just natural. Yeah. Well, that actually is a problem with religion, is because religion wants to, not originally in Christianity in any way that I can perceive, but it wants to delineate between what is natural and animalistic and what is spiritual. And that is a poor delineation because, again, it gets away from the reality that Descartes, as well as Socrates, was wrong. Your body does not live without your spirit. And your spirit does not live without your body. And there's a whole soul thing in there too. Not the same things. But they've conflated them. They've conflated them to be the same things. And it's just not there, that conflation. It's there's nothing in the ancient text that assumes that. In fact, all the ancient texts point to the separation of those things. Now, the separation of them is, categorization, right? We're looking at it so we can understand the system. But the reality is it's all integrated. So the external, the internal, and the self are actually all integrated together. But the self is the thing that is governing all this. All right, let's keep going. So he says Christianity of arrested development. We can accuse Christianity of arrested development and shortcomings. I agree 100%. It's not just that it's arrested development, it's the gatekeeping. There is no situation ever where more knowledge is detrimental. And this happens, this went all the way back to Pelagius and the Pelagian era, and then later on the Origenists and the Origin era and all this stuff. Well, Pelagius was not a heretic. All right. That was a bunch of made up propaganda stuff that came out of Augustine. And you guys probably know at this point, if you watch me for a long time, I'm not a fan of Augustine. Augustine is exactly the point where Christianity became wholly Gnostic. And it had to separate the spirit from the body. Augustine's the reason why in the West, people struggle with the principle of original sin. It is not that you are doomed for all time because of Adam and all this other stuff and whatever. No, it just means that Adam brought sin and death into the world. That's all it is. You are not responsible for your parents' sins. But I will tell you this, there's a thing in the body, it's called epigenetics, and the sins of your parents will play out in you. The sins that your parents commit to you as a child, out of neglect or spite or whatever it may be, those will carry on in you. It will affect your genetic code. It will affect who you are as a being. But I do believe you can heal from those things. That is the work in the inner man. It says, I'm speaking, therefore, not of the deepest and best understanding of Christianity, but of its superficialities and disastrous misunderstandings that are plain for all to see. And that is where most Christians live. And even worse is that is where most people who think they know anything about Christianity live. When I talk to Christians and they trace their roots back to the 5th century, I'm like, okay. And specifically Catholics and Orthodox, that's where they trace their roots back to. They go, well, no, there's stuff before, but we don't really know anything about the primitive church. We just have like, I don't know, like volumes like this of people writing. I hear it all the time. I just watched a video last week, I think, talk about the Council of Nicaea throwing out scriptures. The Book of Enoch was thrown out. They didn't allow it in the canon. The Coptic Church still has the Book of Enoch or does have the Book of Enoch in their canon. This all happened at the Council of Nicaea. No, it didn't. That never occurred. Never occurred at all. Later, there was canonization of the scriptures, but Jerome, if I'm not mistaken, was largely a part of that. Eusebius, Jerome, they were debating it, talking about it. But they didn't canonize anything. Churches had what they had because churches were always independent satellites. And it was from the uniformity, the synthesis, right, of the church. The church then creating its own superstructure in its own way to control its people. All the while living in simulacrum as Martin Luther comes to Rome thinking it's going to be the holy, godly city, and finding out that the priests are sleeping with prostitutes, that they have illegitimate children. It was a big problem, guys. It was a huge problem. Many popes were fathered by former priests and their prostitute mothers and whatnot. Does any of that seem like anything related to Christ? And maybe you don't know that much about it. But what little you do know who Christ was as a teacher, as a sage, as a man who was of impeccable character, does any of that sound like what you believe him to be? I'm speaking, therefore, not of the deepest and best understandings of Christianity, but the superficialities and disastrous misunderstandings that are in plain sight for all to see. The demand made by the Immatio Christo, I'm My Latin's terrible, guys. It's been forever since I did Latin, but whatever. That we should follow the idea and seek to become like it ought, logically, to have the result of developing and exalting the inner man. In actual fact, however, the ideal has been turned by superficial and formalistic minded believers into an external object of worship, and it is precisely this veneration for the object that prevents it from reaching down into the depths of the psyche and giving the latter a wholeness in keeping with the ideal. What is that? That is exactly what I've told you. That is seeking the external. That is where we live. That's where the synthesized person lives, only in the external. There's a problem, too, with living only in the internal. This is the problem with social media, or as I'm calling it, anti-social media, because that's actually what it is. Because you're not actually socializing. Socialization is a physical, I'm in your presence process. But you've taken what happens with the cybernetics and the cybernetic being that you've become. It's interesting too. You go look into what cybernetics means. You know, I love my etymology. Go look into what cybernetics means, and it's basically about control. But you look at your phone. You are taking what is external now, processing it visually, because we are primarily absorbing our world through our visualization of it, right? And we are absorbing that in the internal. So now we've taken what's external and made it internal, because we process those things. When you get that like on social media and you get that dopamine hit, that's internal. When you see a thing and you're having a conversation or whatever, and inside you get the chills, or you get really excited, or hey, let's forget the freaking phone for a minute. Let's look at video games. Man, I don't play a lot of video games anymore these days, but a while ago when the last Mortal Kombat game came out, we got that because I'm a Mortal Kombat guy. I'm a big fighting game guy. I'm a shooter and fighter guy. That's see, my internal and my external, they match up pretty well. So first person shooters, fighters, I do like some strategy games, but generally that was always my bag. And so I'm playing Mortal Kombat, and I'm getting into it, and man, I'm like playing like for an hour, and I'm all sweaty, and my heart rate's up. It's all intense. It's like, how am I generating all this energy? Well, because my brain, as we want to put it, my internal being, because it's not just your brain, it's your spinal cord, all the nerves innervated throughout your body, the physiological the chemicals that are released, the widening of your blood vessels, of the capillaries, all of these things occurring in this moment of excitation through something that's not real, that's on a screen. But why? Why is that internal thing going on? Because I've made that external thing internalized. It's what we naturally do, actually. And that's why these things are so seductive. It's why the Matrix could possibly exist, right? And in fact, that's sort of, in a way, I don't want to use it the way it's commonly used, but in a way, that's kind of sort of how we can look at this. The idea of the holographic universe, the idea that it's just a projection. The thing is, I don't think it's a projection of God. I think that's wrong. It's a projection of us, because we're the observers. And again, this goes back to quantum mechanics and the problem of the observer. Which seems to have been solved. The reason why when you observe something that acts differently is because you're actually literally are absorbing or using its energy on a quantum level. So you're taking something away from it in order to observe it, because observation requires energy. All things require energy. Anyways, you guys still with me? The how are you saying influence from the parents? Clarify that because I've not been following the chat very well. Been looking over there, but you guys kind of trickled in late today. We usually got a couple people in the beginning. But let's play from the narrator. Again, this is from the channel Alt Shift ZZZ. This guy just he reads things live on stream, so you'll see a little counter. People watching. It's pretty funny to read his live chats because people are like, he just keeps going. Oh my goodness, and they almost never are talking about the content.
Accordingly, the divine mediator stands outside as an image, while man remains fragmentary and untouched in the deepest part of him. Christ can indeed be imitated, even to the point of stigmatization, without the imitator coming anywhere near the ideal or its meaning. For it is not a question of an imitation that leaves a man unchanged and makes him into a mere artifact, but of
Spook, to your point, you're saying very blue is closer to UV light. Now we can use machines to see UV. We can use machines to see microwaves. We can use machines to see infrared, right? But again, imagine if we could do all of that, could see all of those things. Like science itself explains the same things that religions do, that there are mysteries to the world. There are things that are not visible to us without some process of revelation, something intermediary of revelation. So the machine is that intermediary of revelation, and in religion, it is your God, right? In some religions, it's not necessarily your God, but it could be part parcel of a ritual or something to that point, right? But you need this intermediary no matter what, because your consciousness, your ability to perceive is not fully developed for all of the things that are within the universe, right? It just can't. And there's an argument to be made that it would be overwhelming to do so. So you can ponder on that.
realizing the ideal on one's own account, Deo concedente, in one's own individual life. We must not forget, however, that even a mistaken imitation may sometimes involve a tremendous moral effort, which has all the merits of a total surrender to some supreme value, even though the real goal may never be reached, and the value is represented externally. It is conceivable that by virtue of this total effort, a man might even catch a fleeting glimpse of his wholeness, accompanied by the feeling of grace that always characterizes this experience. The mistaken idea of a merely outward imitation
Two things. I'm muted. Anyways, I was saying, let's look at this for a second. And I was about to apologize for burping because I'm drinking carbonated water, but I don't need to do that because I was muted. We must not forget, however, that even a mistaken imitation may sometimes involve a tremendous moral effort, which has all the merits of a total surrender to some supreme value. That's important. People do change when they start going to the inner man. See, I'm not here to proselytize to you guys. I believe what I believe. You can listen to me and believe that you can either come to my opinions of these things, or you can take the data, what is useful to you, and apply it to your own lives. I'm not here to convince anyone that my faith is the one true faith. I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that at all. All I need to do is make an argument for the richness and depths of it, and you can make the decision. But there are people who obviously their inner man change with some sort of faith. This isn't always truly God per se, and not meaning, actual God. I mean, a belief in some sort of God or something like that. It is just something that gives this person meaning and purpose and drive. So that's where it lies. The meaning and purpose is where it all lies at. Now, I would argue that without God, everything is meaningless and purposeless. It's all vanity, as the book of Ecclesiastics explains it. We might as well eat and drink and be merry, for tomorrow we die, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which is the most powerful little chapter or section. I mean, those things were divided up 1,000 years after they were written, but section of the Bible, of that epistle, that is never, ever preached on. And it is central to my beliefs, because it's an understanding of the embodiment of the resurrection. And if you don't believe that, and you believe in the Gnostic beliefs that most of the church believes in today, then you're going to be so far off course, so far gone. And it's why you don't see any real change in the churches. It's why you don't see real people in the churches. They're all fake and synthesized themselves. It's all Topo Chio and a Path water bottle. But that, to Jung's point, though, yes, people will have that experience because we're set up to have this kind of experience. Again, it is inherent into our beings. Let's see. We must not forget, however, that even a mistaken imitation may sometimes involve a tremendous moral effort which has all the merits of a total surrender to some supreme value, even though the real goal may never be reached and the value is represented externally. Externally, not internally. All right? God is external to us for certain, but we can know him internally. The only way to truly have done that, though, was by breaking the veil between man and God, right? That is exemplified in the temple. And the temple, as far as the Jews go, right, and their temple ritual before the rabbinic period, that is, they no longer do the ritual sacrifices. But the temple was a literal representation of God's operation in the universe and the throne room of God itself. And so there was a veil that divided the outer portion of the temple and the inner portion of it, where God sat himself. And that veil was there because if there was not something basically protecting man from God directly, it's like utter destruction. His brilliance, his power, his presence is too powerful for our simple beings, which are extremely complex, by the way, but in comparison to that. And what Christ did is he brought those things into union. The veil ripped. When Christ died, this is recorded even outside of the Bible, but the hour that Christ died, there was a great darkening in the sky. There was thunder. There was an earthquake. This is noted externally from the Bible as well. People believed that happened. It wasn't just something that Matthew or Luke wrote later. So, recollect my thought here. Yes, the veil. So what Christ represents is now that all people can become priests in God. Now, what is a priest? Or in Christ, that is. What is a priest? A priest is someone who could talk to God directly. So that veil between the worlds, that veil between being a messenger to God and of God, has been lifted. And so you can see more and know more. Anyways, it says, it is conceivable that by virtue of this total effort, a man may even catch a fleeting glimpse of his wholeness, accompanied by the feeling of grace that always characterizes this experience. Grace. What is grace? Grace is charity. Grace is Let me look this up real quick. It'd be worthwhile. So in English, it's seemingly effortless beauty or charm or movement or proportion, of course. Characteristic or quality pleasing for its charm or refinement, a sense of fitness or prosperity. So I'm going to go to the etymology. From a late 12th century, God's unmerited favor, love, or help. From the French, grace, to pardon, divine grace, mercy. And this from the Latin, gratia, favor, esteem, regard, pleasing quality, goodwill, gratitude. More importantly, though, that's the etymology. Let's go to a lexicon, a biblical lexicon. Perfect. Let's go Ephesians 1. I know you guys can't see what I'm doing. That's 123. Let's go 1:1. Because I'm sure Paul will say. And I'll bring this up in a second, guys. I didn't have any plans to do this, so I'll just go in with the flow. That's what I do. Going with the flow. So let me remove that for a second. Change this up. Okay. So what we have here is the BibleHub.com. I was about to say Blue Letter Bible. And this is a lexicon. So this is a one-for-one comparison of the Greek words. And we can look them up in concordance. And we can see the original Greek, and then eventually you can get the, into the concordance. So here we have Chiro, the anointed one, the Messiah. So we can go to that, and I clicked on it. You guys can't see this because StreamYards makes it a pain. So I pulled that up, and this is how you study. This is how you study language, guys. If you can't actually be learning the language itself, which would be great, you study this way, and you can start to see where the words come from. Again, this is similar to studying etymology. So we see how the word was written: to anoint by rubbing or pouring olive oil on someone, to represent the flow, empowering of the Holy Spirit, anointing, literally involving rubbing oil on the head. And then we can go and we can see the origin of the word, to anoint, anointed, yada, yada, yada. Here are the Greek references. We go through here. So, but what I was looking for was grace. And I can't remember the word for grace in Greek off the top of my head, but I'm going to find it here. Whoops. Screen share. Come on, let's go. Because if I'm not mistaken, it's going to be right here. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. So this says grace, kindness, right? And it says origin. It is a believe that's a primary word. Charis. That's what it is. Charis. And the interesting thing is this word has some similar features to the word that represents a mark or an imprint. I think actually what we're just going to do here, I'm just going to share my second monitor real quick. Because at least I can tab through this way. So here we went to the concordance. If you just type in any Bible passage, you put lexicon, Bible Hub will come up, and you can do this yourself. You guys want to know how I know things that I know? Is because I studied the language. I studied language, and I study how the language is interrelated, and I study the history, and I study how the people think. I study the metaphysics. I study the writings of the people who were closest to this outside of the scripture. That's how I know what I know. I don't go looking for everyone else's commentary. I don't let people tell me what to believe. I can absorb some of what they say, and I can agree with it even, because as I often do. But yeah. So charis is literally means grace and kindness, right? It says here is a cognate, another feminine noun, favor, disposed to, incline, favorable towards, right? That's what grace is, God's favor, plain and simple. And that's why you say to royalty, your grace, is because they're favored by God, which is not true, actually. they are not favored by God at all. God allows them in that position. God wants you to worship him as king. So just as a cursory, this isn't, I'm not saying that they're like totally related, but it's interesting. Mark down here, right? A stamp, an impression from kerasos, to sharpen or engrave. It's the imprint. We're going to talk about the imprint here in a bit. Charagma is the word. I always forget this. And guys, I mean, the dyslexia is words escape me, names escape me, things escape me because of that. It gets very confusing. But hey, I figured it out. I work my way through it. A stamp, impress, sculpture, engrave, a stamp, a sign. Now, people think this is all kinds of things. And right there, brand mark was originally any impress on a coin or a seal used by an engraver on a die, a stamp, or branding. Well, we're going to get into this. We'll talk about it. But essentially, I keep telling you, the mark of the beast is not some mystical thing, man. It's who you belong to. Do you belong to Christ? Do you have his seal? Do you have his imprint on you? Or do you belong to the kingdom of Satan? It's not some magical thing that the people made it up to be. It does have more significant meaning. I mean, the 3 6s is specifically the government, the economy, and and the religious system of man. That's what that means. It's not magical. Is it a man's name? I don't think so, but perhaps it was written to represent Nero as well, as a type, as an archetype. But if the fabric of reality is unfolding in patterns and cycles, then that doesn't bother me at all. But I don't know. We don't know that John wrote during the reign of Nero. In fact, he probably wrote afterwards. It seems to be the case that John of Patmos, who I believe to be the apostle, but other people think it's a different person. We know. was it Valentinius, I think, was the emperor of the time. So Nero wasn't the emperor when John wrote that. Irenaeus talks about it and believes it is a name and it will calculate to a specific name. But Irenaeus is very smart because he understands it's about worship. He says they'll light up censers, incense and all that kind of stuff, and they'll bow down and worship. He understood that really well. He didn't understand that it was worship of men, and ultimately the driver of those things, of course, would be the fallen one, right? The Beelzebub or Satan or whatever you want to call him. All the titles given to him. And of course, this is important because archetype is an imprint and a sign. It's where the word comes from, guys. Archetype. Like I said, we're going to talk about this stuff. All ties in together. Symbol, emblem, from Latin, typus, figure, image, form, kind, from Greek, typos, a blow, a dent, an impression, a mark, effect of a blow, figure, or relief, image, statue, anything wrought of metal or stone, generally from general form, character, outline, sketch. And then its root from typtin, to strike, to beat. Well, how do you control somebody? How do you control them? Well, if you can't do it with your words, if you can't make the argument, what do? Well, you strike or you beat them. You control them physically. Or maybe verbally, you strike and beat them. You control them by manipulating them with your words. And so the root is tup. A variant of root is to, I don't know if I'm pronouncing these right, but to push, stick, knock, or beat. Kind of interesting, huh? Kind of interesting. So, but that's where archetype comes from, is that type. Let's read some more of this, or listen to some more of the book.
Christi is further exacerbated by a typically European prejudice which distinguishes the Western attitude from the Eastern. Western man is held in thrall by the 10,000 things. He sees only particulars. He is ego-bound and thing-bound, and unaware of the deep root of all being. Eastern man, on the other hand, experiences the world of particulars, and even his own ego, like a dream. He is rooted essentially in the ground, which attracts him so powerfully that his relations with the world are relativized to a degree that is often incomprehensible to us.
So this goes back to, East versus Western mentalities, but I think there's more to it than just the spiritual surface of things. But Eastern man is for certain, by all metrics that I know of, more willing to fall in line. They have far less geniuses produced, even though they have higher IQs in general. And that's not all Asian nations, of course. I mean, you're not going to find this is the funny thing about that stuff. And this is the funny thing about race and all, right? They go, "Oh, this race is smarter than that race." Well, let's judge Filipinos and people from Thailand and their IQs versus, I don't know, the people in Hong Kong or China, mainland, Taiwan, let's or South Korea or Japan. There's differences, guys. There's always differences. And a lot of it's always geography, and a lot of it has to do with the development of the culture. Did the people breed out certain behaviors? Did over time, did they continue to be needing basic survival skills? Well, that's a huge factor, seemingly, in how IQs advance. Because if you're just a bushman, you don't really need to sit down and think of abstract things and those things that change in your body genetically from epigenetics because of such things, because everything we do changes our body, folks. It is a malleable, adaptable machine. It's not going to necessarily change your height or whatever, but, or but that's set in stone. But you can get fat, you can get skinny, you can do things with nutrition to make your hair go white. You can do lots of stuff to your body to change it, and you can see specifically how in war zones, in wartime, people have higher rates of heart attack because of those stress levels, and that affects the next generation or two after them. Even they are at higher risk for heart disease because of epigenetic factors. So, anyways, just tonight, some things to throw out there with that.
The Western attitude, with its emphasis on the object, tends to fix the ideal, Christ, in its outward aspect.
Oh, and of course, the East is definitely far more spiritual, far more connected. The I Ching is a great book, quite interesting. You guys know I have my Eastern, like martial arts, right? I was never a weeb. I did do some Japanese martial arts, the Aki Jiu-Jitsu, which is um, Aki Jiu-Jitsu takes its roots in Japanese combat jiu-jitsu, not the more formalized systems of judo, which is from jiu-jitsu, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which is from judo. Because Juro Kano developed a systematized method for teaching and classify these things. Before that, the martial arts were not so generally formally organized, except for some of the Okinawan martial arts, perhaps. But yeah, that's another tangent. But I was always into that stuff, ninjas, all that. But then I got into doing Wing Chun, which a lot of people will say is completely impractical. It's because they don't understand. They don't understand. It's not about the system. It's about the training. Everything is practical if trained properly. You have to train it properly. But it's like telling me like an eye gouge isn't practical because people have well, it's hard to hit the eyes. Wing Chun specifically has a finger dart. It's hard to hit the eyes. It's hard to, you can't really do it in real life. You can't do that much damage. It's like, you know how many times I've been accidentally poked in the eye, just sparring? Like, what are you talking about? I've poked myself in the eye once, doing multiple attackers, trying to shield and keeping my thumbs open. And one of the attackers hit my hand and my thumb went whoop right in the eye. And that'll take you out, man. It's hard to fight through that. People say that the stupidest stuff, though. Stupidest things. I say stupid things too, of course. I'm not immune from stupidity. But anyways, I got really into Chinese martial arts and the Qigong and all this kind of stuff. And in the internal martial arts, I talked a little bit about this, I think Tuesday. Like, they are more generally, these people still think to this day they're more rooted in that. If you go to China, people are still worshiping what they believe are gods, ancient gods that have existed for them for upteen thousands of years, according to their beliefs. It's still a very pagan world. If you go to the Philippines, you might know that knives are illegal, but everyone carries one because it's a dangerous place. And if you know Filipino martial arts systems, you realize that they're all concerned with knife fighting. That's all that they do. And in fact, the Spaniards helped develop that. There's a dual sworded Spanish knife fighting system. I can't recall the name of it. It's not dual swords. It's a dagger and a sword, and it's based in a dance, and I cannot remember the name of it. There's martial arts systems all over the world. There's a stick fighting system that's Portuguese that's pretty good. In any case, it's concerned mostly with multiple attackers. But the Spanish influence there in the Philippines and the knife fighting culture, these things happen like this kind of coexistence of these things happen to bring up these very specific martial arts styles. And over there, though, yes, they will carry knives and do this and that, but they actually believe that someone can hex you and that you'll die, and that you have to wear magical amulets and stuff to protect yourself. Like that's real to them. I watched Professor Dutton talk about this, that it was psychosomatic, psychophysiological, that they induced this as a nocebo type effect. Something like that. Sure, maybe. But the point of that then is that if that's true, how powerful is the mind really to affect your body? And if you have a different type of spiritual understanding of yourself, a different view of the universe and the world, how powerful is that to affect your actions in the world and your body, and most importantly, yourself?
And thus to rob it of its mysterious relation to the inner man. It is this prejudice, for example, which impels the Protestant interpreters of the Bible to interpret Greek stuff, referring to the kingdom of God, as among you instead of with.
When he says Greek stuff, he literally means Greek stuff. I don't know why that is there. I can't even highlight it in that way. But yes, he says he's as among you instead of within you, and it is within you. That is the correct interpretation. For those of you who are certain translation Nazis or whatever for the Bible, King James alone type people.
I do not
It's got to
mean
be
to
the
say anything about the validity of the
1590 or
Western
whatever it is.
attitude. We are sufficiently convinced of its rightness. But if we try to come to a real understanding of Eastern man, as the psychologist must,
Nice, Tahari. Nice.
we find it hard to rid ourselves of certain misgivings. Anyone who can square it with his conscience is free to decide this question as he pleases, though he may be unconsciously setting himself up as an arbiter mundi. I, for my part, prefer the precious gift of doubt, for the reason that it does not violate the virginity of things beyond our ken. Christ, the ideal, took upon himself the sins of the world. But if the ideal is wholly outside, then the sins of the individual are also outside, and consequently he is more of a fragment than ever, since superficial misunderstanding conveniently enables.
Let's come back to that. Christ, the ideal, took upon himself the sins of the world. But if the ideal is wholly outside, then the sins of the individual are also outside. Meaning, if Christ is a image, an icon outside of you that you are worshiping, then there's nothing internal in you that is going to go on. You're going to pray to that icon and say, please God, please Father, please Lord, please Jesus, make me better, fix me. I don't know why I do these things, yada, 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 help me out. I don't pray to icons. I understand the Orthodox belief in icons. We're going to talk about icons, guys, here soon. This is going to come together for you. Icons are simulacrum. They don't represent the real thing, and you lose the reality which is there. You lose the meaning, the purpose, the deeper things that are there. The reason why Christians started taking the term Christian upon themselves was because, well, they were called little Christs derogatorily. They were being made fun of, and they felt it apt to take that upon themselves to be made, because that was they're believing, oh, they're going to make fun of us for it. Sure. We'll take on that, because that's the kind of humble people we are. Before that, they would have been people of the way, and they would have been people of the way of life. And they would have said, you are people of the way of death, because they would have related these things as the two kingdoms. And that language is clear from the D decay. And we believe that the D decay was written around 50 AD or maybe even earlier. Now, there's this thing in scholarship, biblical scholarship, about a Q text. Well, these things sound too familiar, the Synoptic Gospels, so why, they have to be, there has to be a major text that was before that they all copied it from. That's idiocy. You know why they sound very familiar and they echo very familiar, even though they're slightly different? That is the Synoptic Gospels. That is Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is different. John's a different gospel that was written later. It does not echo those three. The reason why they're different is because they were written by different people who witnessed or talked to witnesses of what happened. John Mark, who wrote the book of Mark, was a companion of companion of Peter. Almost every scholar, religious or non-religious, anyone who looks into it, agrees that John Mark was a companion of Peter. Peter was a very important and influential figure in the early church. He was not the first pope, though. I can promise you that. Peter, his account of Christ is one where Christ is constantly being overwhelmed and trying to escape the crowds. It's very different from Matthew's account of Christ. Luke's account, Luke was a doctor and somewhat of a historian, and he was a companion of Paul the Apostle. You can read about him in the book of Acts, and in fact, there's a point in Acts around, I don't know, I think it's chapter 19 or so, might be a little bit earlier than that, might be around 15. There's a point in Acts where Luke switches from talking about the church in a third-person perspective of a history that has been related to him to saying I and me and us, because he is now part of that history that is unfolding. Matthew was one of the original apostles. He was a tax collector, so he was very literate. Now, there's a use of the word literate in multiple ways. There is literate as in I am well read, well educated, and there is literate as in I can read. In most senses, in the ancient world, literate meant that you were educated, but people were not highly literate per se, as far as they're able to read. There wasn't a huge need to do so. They can maybe read signs. It's like illiterate people today. I have met many illiterate people in my lifetime. It's one of the things that happens as you are, work in a jail. I was a education major. When I was 29, so it's been 12 years or more. But I was an education major, and I was going to a middle school for observations. It was a pretty rough school in the area, and I was volunteering hours as a tutor. I had to teach a seventh grader how to read Dr. Seuss. He read a basic book, a Dr. Seuss book. I got him to read the book he'd never read before in his life. That's a teenager who they've passed on through school until the seventh grade. This kid was quite troubled, of course. Lots of other stuff going on with him, but this is common. I just bought a car off a guy who told me he was illiterate. He has guys working for him, so whatever. There are still illiterate people in the world. It was much more common in ancient days. And you have to understand that, of course, language, as far as the written word, has been an evolving process where we went originally from pictographs and hieroglyphics, right, to things like cuneiform, which were little lines and slashes and all to represent things, and then finally we get this this alphabet. That word comes from the Hebrew, by the way, if you didn't know that. But we get this modern alphabet, which is oh man, Is it Phoenician? Is that what it is? I cannot recall off the top of my head now. But yeah, these we've evolved this, and then back in ancient days, words were all written together. So one of the most annoying things when you're learning Latin, everything's written together. You have to figure out where the words end and the spaces. And punctuation evolved. All of these things evolved because the rate in which literacy grew over time. They made it easier for the reader. Now we're at a point where basically they want everything to be written like you're 3 or a kindergartner or something could read. But yeah, the whole point of this is I don't even know where I started with all that, as I usually do, right? You guys ought to know me by now. The whole point of this, though, is the externalizing of everything, not internalizing it. And I was talking about the icons and all of that, right? And we still operate off these processes. Just now, the icons, someone who's a famous actor that you love. Now the icon is your favorite newscaster on TV, right? Or your favorite politician. AOC is now your icon. Yes, it was not widely available. It was the printing press. Absolutely, Holly. But people could get educated if they were willing, and rich people were educated and literate. That is what a liberal arts education is about, a classical education, which I'm a big fan of. And what I present to you is what a classical education produces. Because and I had enough wherewithal when I was young enough to be interested in that kind of thing, and I wanted to get a classical education, so I studied a lot of the classics. And so when I bring to you stuff of history, it's really strange how just 200 some odd years ago, the founders of the United States understood all of these classics, yet almost nobody today has any understanding of them unless they're they're in academia. And academia did not exist the way that it does today in the foundations of this country.
Quite literally, to cast his sins upon Christ, and thus to evade his deepest responsibility.
And that's not what you do either. That's a misinterpretation. Casting your sins upon Christ is a misunderstanding of what the process is. That, again, is Augustinian, it's Calvinistic, and most importantly, it's Gnostic. So Christ did not take on the sins of the world. That's not what happened. That's not in the Bible. He died so that we could live without sin. He died so that we could live without death. What is sin? It's missing the mark. What's the mark? The mark is to be divine. That's what it is. It's to live divinely. What does that mean? That means that you are supposed to be an imager of God. And that when you do sin, you should feel bad about it. It should be a problem. And that brings a certain kind of angst to your life that most people don't want to deal with. It's easier to eat, drink, and be merry. It's easier to ignore things. It's easier to be synthesized. It's easier to be part of this world.
Which is contrary to the spirit of Christianity. Such formalism and laxity were not only one of the prime causes of the Reformation, they are also present within the body of Protestantism. If the supreme value, Christ, and the supreme negation, sin, are outside, then the soul is void. Its highest and lowest are missing.
If the soul is void, then if you go back to the stream I made last week, and I haven't been saying all the buzz terms, right? But then you're the last man without soul. do you see how this comes together? That this is the society has always been synthetic. That's the point. It is the most synthetic it's ever been today because we're constantly losing the knowledge of the past via gatekeepers and via manipulations and people wanting to serve their own needs. And I don't mean that those who manipulate it, but I mean those who or those who would manipulate, but those who are manipulated, they are serving their own means. They are serving their own emotional gratification. They're not developing the inner self. That's hard, man. That's hard. To be truly honest all the time, like that's a hard thing to do. And people will talk. I hear people talk about honesty, and they'll be like, "Well, we can't always be honest. There's certain things, politenesses, and da 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 da." No, I don't agree with you. We can't always be honest. Sometimes things shouldn't be said. That's a different thing. But I think we should always be honest. Does that mean I am always honest? No, honestly, I'm not. There are times where I'm not honest. But more times than not, 99.999% of the time, I am very, very, very honest. And, those situations where I falter, well, that's because of things like consequences. And consequences are what brings meaning. And sometimes we fear the consequences instead of the truth. Or sorry, we fear the truth in that which consequences it shall bring. But frankly, if it's going to bring a negative consequence, then that was a spanking that you deserved. I mean, what it comes down to.
The Eastern attitude, more particularly the Indian, is the other way about. Everything, highest and lowest, is in the transcendental subject. Accordingly, the significance of the Atman, the self, is heightened beyond all bounds. But with Western man, the value of the self sinks to zero. Hence, the universal depreciation of the soul in the West. Whoever speaks of the reality of the soul or psyche is accused of psychologism. Psychology is spoken of as if it were only psychology, and nothing else. The notion that there can be psychic factors which correspond to defined figures is regarded as a devaluation of the latter.
So what Jung is saying here is he knows that he's in the business of the soul, of the suke. He knows he's in that business. Most others don't. But see, Jung believed in Christ too. And because of that, I think Christ blessed him. He blessed him with great knowledge and great depth and great understanding of our reality and useful understanding. There are a lot of psychologists out there that aren't useful. Without Carl Jung, we wouldn't have Jordan Peterson. You can think whatever you want about Jordan Peterson, but I'll tell you what, the man is on fire right now. He has no fear, it seems like. He went through his ordeal and he's come back even stronger. And right now, he is going head to head with a WEF. And if you haven't seen that video that he made the other day, I suggest that you do. It's quite a long interview about what's going on in the world and the purposeful starvation and depopulation that is being caused by the superstructure.
Smacks of blasphemy to think that a religious experience is a psychic process, for, so it is argued, the religious experience is not only psychological. Anything psychic is only nature, and therefore people think nothing religious can come out of it. At the same time, such critics never hesitate to derive all religions, with the exception of their own, from the nature of the psyche. It is a telling fact that two theological reviewers in my book Psychology and Religion, one of them Catholic, the other Protestant, assiduously overlooked my demonstration of the psychic origin of religious phenomena.
Yeah, because that's what they do. So I'm not going to go over that again. I highly suggest you look that up, but I am trying to end on the 3-hour mark today. So what I am going to do is get the next video up. And this goes to the next portion of Baudrillard's simulation and simulacrum. And you understand now why I did this. Now, I've talked about some of these things already, and that I mentioned the iconography. I don't know that Baudrillard was a religious man, but he certainly understood the divine irreverence of images.
Beyond medicine and the army, favored terrains of simulation, the question returns to religion and the simulacrum of divinity. I forbade that there be any simulacra in the temples, because the divinity that animates nature can never be represented. Indeed, it can be. But what becomes of the divinity when it reveals itself in icons, when it is multiplied in simulacra? Does it remain the supreme power that is simply incarnated in image?
So this is here where he started beyond medicine and that the army forbade, because that is the beginning. He starts talking about some other things there. I wanted to get straight to the point. So just to let you know, like I said, this isn't in depth of all of these things. This is cursory, but this is where, uh, in part, the ideas that I'm integrating. Right, this is where they're coming from. All
That
right,
is
video.
simply incarnated in images as a visible theology? Or does it volatilize itself in the simulacra that alone deploy their power and pomp of fascination? The visible machinery of icons substituted for the pure and intelligible idea of God. This is precisely what was feared by iconoclasts, whose millennial quarrel is still with us today. This is precisely because they predicted this omnipotence of simulacra, the faculty simulacra have of effacing God from the conscience of man, and from the destructive the destructive annihilating truth that they allowed to appear. That deep down God never existed, that only the simulacrum ever existed, even that God himself was never anything but his own simulacrum. From this came their urge to destroy the images. If they could have believed that these images only obfuscated or masked the Platonic idea of God, there would have been no reason to destroy them. One can live with the idea of distorted truth, but their metaphysical despair came from the idea that the image didn't conceal anything at all, and that these images were in essence not images, such as an original model would have made them, but perfect simulacra, forever radiant with their own fascination. Thus, the death of the divine referential must be exercised at all costs.
All right, so let's go through this a little bit. He says, does it remain the supreme power that it simply incarnated in the images as a visible theology, or does it volatilize itself in the simulacra that alone deploy their power and pomp of fascination? The visible machinery of icons substituted for pure and intelligible idea of God. Now, if you know anything about iconography, he's not wrong here. He's not wrong in how it is viewed. And so much so to the point that I have had Orthodox folks tell me that if you don't believe in icon worship, then you're denying Christ. No, you fool. The icon is a simulacra of Christ. Christ was not. It was not a falsehood, a false sign of God. He was God. And of course, if God entered our presence in the form of a man, none of you would know him, because you're all deplorable. Like, there's a thing when you're actually a good person It's a weird thing, but it happens. It's happened to me a lot, especially when you're really, really in the self and you're really in balance in that inner and outer man, and you're really, really, really just on fire, to put it that way. You're red hot in purity, if you would, and piousness. People see that, and it makes them uncomfortable. And I don't mean going along and preaching to them and telling, well, you're doing bad things and you're on this and that. No, you're going to die and go to hell. I don't mean that. I mean, when you have that calm, when you have that peace about you, the people who have the darkest souls see that and they will attack you. It is insane, but it happens. It's real. Christ is the image of God. And you were made in that image to be an imager of God. That is the law that Christ laid down on the Sermon on the Mount. But you do as you please. I don't care if you want to, you want to worship icons, go for it, or pray to them or whatever. And that's the only way that you can interface with God. Man, you have little faith. Like how I don't understand how you're taking a 5th century concept. Actually, it's closer to the 6th century, from what I understand. And they'll go, well, but there were pictures in the catacombs, even the Jewish temple. There were archangels and cherubim. Yeah, not God. They didn't pray to him. And an image and a picture can convey a lot to a person who's illiterate. And they'll give you that line of argument, and I agree with them on that line of argument. But if you need something external to visualize God, all the work that's going to be done is going to be externalized. And that's Jung's point, right? That I just played for you. And says, this is precisely because they predicted this omnipotence of simulacra. The faculty simulacra have an emphasis. Sorry, excuse me, guys. The faculty simulacra have the emphasis God, or effacing God from the conscious of man, and the destructive, annihilating truth that they allow to appear, that deep down God never existed, that only the simulacrum ever existed, even that God himself was never anything but his own simulacrum. From this came the urge to destroy the images. If they could have believed that these images only obfuscated or masked the Platonic ideal of God, and there it is again, the Platonic ideal, because the church became Neoplatonists. You know, I maybe have heard about Baudrillard once before, never really registered in my brain. Someone's probably told me about it. Probably knew about the Matrix connection at some point. Never thought about it. What got me on this was James Lindsay, because you guys know how much I enjoy James Lindsay's work, because he talks about commies, and boy, do I not like commies. But he talks about the underpinnings of the intellectual movements of communists in the last century and how it's affecting us today, how it's being played out in their simulacrum, right? And he mentioned this idea of hyper reality, and it was the cataclysm. It put everything into perspective for me. And so then I came up with the idea of the synthetic society, which is all societies that aren't living naturally in their roots, that aren't living in the real world, that don't have a deep spiritual life, an inner life, and an external life, who aren't in communion with their community, trying to bring peace. Instead, it's It's seeking all those things external, all the pleasures, all the things that the last man wants, all the technology and the comfort. And those aren't real people. They're just Topachio in a path bottle. I don't know. I mean, seriously, it's scary to think about. But I watch Tim Pool quite a bit. Tim's been saying it about, I think these people do they actually have souls? These NPC types, that sparks in them somewhere deep buried. But I think for some of them, it's actually has been extinguished. I think those people that fully believe in a materialistic world, fully embrace it, and fully embrace their nihilism, I think they are soulless. So here it says, there would have been no reason to destroy them. That is, the icons from the iconoclast. This was in like the 7th or 8th century. So the iconoclasts were an early kind of reformist movement in the church. And you have to understand that the Protestants were protesting the Catholic Pope. That's what the word means. And the papacy. And people will tell you that the Protestantism was the restoration of biblical Christianity. That's not true at all. It was trying to restore the roots. The closest people who even got to anything like that on a large scale would have been the Methodist. Well, we're talking about, Charles Wesley, or John and Charles Wesley. We're talking about like hundreds of years after what's considered the Reformation. And no, there were people, I think, earlier who got really close to it. And that would be the Quakers. I actually watched a thing on the other week, and someone talked about the Quakers being a heretical sect of Christianity. I was like, you're insane, dude. The Quakers live exactly how the scriptures teach to live. They have a problem with authority, though. They have a very hard time allowing authority to flourish, and the not archetypes, the hierarchies to come. But being peaceful, they being judicious with people, all kinds of things that are biblical. They believe in pacifism, which is funny to me because Christians will argue blue in the face that Christianity is not a peaceful or a pacifistic religion, that there are justifications for battle and fighting. And I'm like, no. But that's what a simulacrum is, right? That's what that is. That's being so far removed from the origins, from understanding the basic words that are written down, and then the 400 years worth of writing from, teachers in the church. And that's what they were. They were the most learned men who were teaching others. Because again, they were literate and not everyone else was. And most of them were literate in Greek philosophy too. And so that eventually became absorbed. But mind you, this is in part the process of how it's supposed to work. God has us in this world. We are going to absorb these ideas, but he says and he warns to not embrace the vain philosophies of men. You get into years later, it starts vain philosophies or any philosophy, right? And you get to someone like Kierkegaard, who's basically like, oh no, if you're gonna go for God, you're gonna be all in, or you're not in at all. You're all in or you're all out. And I'm like, yeah, that is correct. Christ said you have to count the cost. For who would build a tower without knowing that they have the proper money and construction materials to build it? They would just start it and it would never happen. That's not wise. Or who would take their armies into battle without judging the size of the other army and the cost to his men, if they would even be able to win that battle.
One can see that the iconoclasts, whom one accuses of disdaining and negating images, were those who accorded them their true value, in contrast to the iconolators who only saw reflections in them and were content to venerate a filigree god. On the other hand, one can say that the icon worshippers were the most modern minds, the most adventurous, because in the guise of having God become apparent in the mirror of images, they were already enacting his death and his disappearance in the epiphany of his representations, which perhaps they already knew no longer represented anything, that they were purely a game, but that was therein that the great game lay, knowing also that it is dangerous to unmask images, since they dissimulate the fact that there is nothing behind them.
Dissimulate, the idea of removing the simulation, right? And this is what well, the saints, the icons, all those things are about, right? Because again, the church appropriates. It always has. You have to live in this world, but it does so quite unwisely sometimes. In its appropriation, it created the pantheon of the pagan gods again, but it's just the saints. And the veneration of Mary is a very particular important one because, well, I don't know why that happened. I know that that there are writers in the future who look back on writers of the past and they see what they have written. I'm thinking specifically Clement of Alexandria, who was a teacher in the church, in the Alexandrian church, and he said that Mary was not a perpetual virgin. But I can't remember who the commenter was. It might have been Jerome or somebody. I can't recall. But somebody much later, a couple hundred years, we're talking, said, "Yeah, no. That's when he said this. He didn't mean that." So then now, even future people living now today, right, are writing on Catholic apologetic websites. I've literally read this. That we have to go with the later interpretation of what he, no, he explained this. That's not what that passage says. He explained this, that it was a belief that she had perpetual birth pains, not perpetual virginity. And this goes to this argument that that's what he was saying. It doesn't make any sense in the context, though. The context does, to some degree, lend to that, but it also is speaking of her virginity. And this goes back to the idea, of course, that did she have perpetual birth pains of having Christ, or did she have no birth pains at all? Because that was sort of what the teachers of the church teach now. Oh, Mary had no pain during childbirth. Well, first off, that's a lie. Has to be. I'll tell you why. Because the curse. Eve would have much more pain in birth and suffering because of the curse. That applies to all women. My wife had the most amazing birth that the very experienced midwife and nurse midwife and doula have ever seen. And I believe them when they say that. It was the most peaceful, easy birth. Do you think my wife was not in some pain and not some frustration? Of course she was. Could God come into this earth even easier? Yes, but I don't think that making it mystified and unreal and unanimalistic, because again, we have to embrace that. I've always had a problem with the church not embracing that. It's an argument I've had with my father. We're not animals. Yes, we are. We're a different kind of animal, though. We're where the gap between God and animal is. We're at the pinnacle, at the top of the mountain, where heaven and earth meet. That's what we are. It's in all of our symbols. It's in the sign of the cross, which is also a sun symbol, by the way. And there's reasons for that. There's good reasons for that. So, yeah. Anyways, the idea that somehow we can superimpose a later belief on an earlier belief is the essence of what simulacra and simulation is about.
This was the approach of the Jesuits, who founded their politics on the virtual disappearance of God and on the worldly and spectacular manipulation of consciences, the evanescence of God in the epiphany of power, the end of transcendence, which now only serves as an alibi for a strategy altogether free of influences and signs. Behind the baroqueness of images hides the eminence grease of politics. This way, the stake will always have been the murderous power of images, murderers of the real, murderers of their own model, as the Byzantine icons could be those of divine identity. To this murderous power is opposed that of representations as a dialectical power, the visible and intelligible mediation of the real. All Western faith and good faith became engaged in this wager on representation, that a sign could refer to the depth of meaning, that a sign could be exchanged for meaning, and that something could guarantee this exchange. God, of course. But what if God himself can be simulated? That is to say, can be reduced to the signs that constitute faith? Then the whole system becomes weightless. It is no longer itself anything but a gigantic simulacrum, not unreal, but a simulacrum. That is to say, never exchanged for the real, but exchanged for itself, in an uninterrupted circuit without reference or circumference.
Let me bring that up for you. This idea of the murdering of these things is important too. Baudrillard goes on to talk about how science murders, and this is very much, in part, the terminology of infinitesimal fractional reductionism that murders everything. It takes the meaning and belief in the strength out of it when we're constantly looking outward externally to smaller and smaller and smaller proportions and overly classifying things, creating too many divisions between things. Right. This is in part what the postmodernist, Baudrillard being a part of them, although postmodernists often will not consider themselves postmodernists, but it's often what they are getting at. It's the deconstructionism. That is the purpose of science, is to deconstruct everything, at least in its modern iteration. And through deconstruction, reverse engineering, they believe that they can re-engineer everything, but they can't and they won't. It's not possible for them. There are limitations. I forget what the principle is called, but there is a theory or a principle out there in science. Why don't we have any experience with extraterrestrial life? Why can't we see them? Well, there is this principle that the factors to get communication out and to get off planet and to explore the universe are so overwhelmingly complicated that perhaps there just are no civilizations to ever do so. And that's why I say specifically that space is too vast, and in fact, probably much larger than we perceive it to be. We start talking about light speed and measuring things like that. Yeah, we can. I'm all the time, guys. You don't probably realize this, but I'm all the time reading little articles on science and physics and stuff like that in the background. It pops up on my phone and Google, and they give you stuff to read, and that's some of the stuff I have toggled up, and so I read up on these things briefly, generally, quite often, like almost daily, and So they recently discovered a new, some new further out galaxies and stuff like that they couldn't see before with the new Webb telescope, and they're contemplating how long ago it was and how it formed and all that stuff because of the age of the light. The problem with this is that light speed's not a constant. We know it's not a constant. In fact, we use an equation to make it a constant because it changes. The further problem with this is that we don't know that redshift is real. Redshift is a theory that seems real to us, but then there's issues with that. And redshift is based on the Doppler effect, which affects sound, but there is no proof that it affects light shifting. And in that, we already have two presuppositions that are wrong. We have a presupposition that light is constant at a constant speed, and that's wrong. That's not correct by science. You can fact check me on this stuff. And the other one is that redshift works like the Doppler effect. That's a presupposition that's wrong there. So what are your conclusions going to be? Well, they're going to be simulacra. They have to be. And I've talked about the redshift problem before. You can get this with you can see this. There are certain stars that have, or galaxies even, that have what's that called? A filament. Sorry, that attaches the two of them. Often we think of this in, I think, quasars, but there's actual galaxies that are positioned via redshift like this instead of like this, right? In perspective, they're on different planes, different distances, yet the filament is redshifted differently itself, and often more towards the more distant object and not the closer one, or vice versa, right? It's the closer one, or it's shifted to the closer one. Well, how is it connected to this other one when we know, because we see all the stars as flat, but if you were to go over above them, we know that they're apart. We can't figure this out. The scientists that try to talk about these things, well, they get shut down. Because, there's the priest class, there is the religious system. As Curtis Yarvin put it, the cathedral. And we know that, or those people know or believe that these stars are actually far further away than we believe them to be. We know that the energy needed to travel space, to say, let's create a practical way of doing it, like creating a warp drive, is not feasible in any sort of modern understanding of energy production. And once you start that energy, then you have to worry about the problem of inertia. Because once an object is acted upon, inertia carries it, you're hurtling through space, warping space-time around you. Well, technically you're not moving, but you're moving. And as it warps around you, you continue to accelerate, well, you have to stop. Well, you have to stop a really long time before you get there. And if you don't, and you stop on a dime, guess what happens? You go splat. We all know this. We all know this when we have to hit the brakes really hard in our car and we jerk forward. Now, maybe out there, things don't operate the same way. Again, we don't know how things operate in deep space. We're not out there. We believe that we perceive things correctly out there, which I do not believe that we do. And so I started off with this talking about how science murders everything. Well, Baudrillard gets into that. But this is, looking outwardly, extendedly, and trying to find these other civilizations. Oh, of course, the stars are our future, whatever. I'm all for, going through our solar system, but I do not think it is feasible for any civilizations. They have to be so far beyond us to be able to travel between these galaxies, between the stars. I mean, Alpha Centauri, we're talking about 4 light years away. 4 light years. And as you start, if you were to travel the speed of light to get there within 4 years, decades and centuries would pass here because of relativity. Because of how, when you speed up, your existence stays the same. You're experiencing things the same. But everyone else is not at your speed. And of course, this gets into time travel and all that stuff. I talked about this the other week about how God created the universe in 7 days. But people don't consider it. They don't think about these things. They don't get too deep into it. But guys, I would love to keep going. I'm going to play the end of this this video. I actually want to tie it back into another video, but I don't want to do a 4-hour stream today. I want to be able to cook dinner. So I didn't expect to be so talkative again. That leaves us with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 videos. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to end on this video and reading, obviously, from Baudrillard's Simulation and Simulacrum. And we'll pick it up next week with Jung, and we're going to do this some more. In fact, these first few videos I had on this were actually the longest. These are about 6-7 minute long clips. And the other ones are pretty sure cut it down to be quite a bit shorter. So it should go quicker. But again, this all ties into the synthetic society. It all ties into what I'm doing. It ties into how I'm thinking about it, how I view the world. And it is my attempt to create a succinct style philosophy of a view of the world and how this actually works. And I didn't really set out to do that, but that's what it's become. And oh well, I mean, I've always considered myself somewhat of a philosopher. People think that that's silly. People go, oh yeah, whenever someone says they're a philosopher, I tend to cringe and roll my eyes. Yeah, that's because you're dumb. It's because you're dumb, and you cannot at all believe that someone who is autodidactic, who kind of despises academia, who doesn't think in your manner, in your little closed circuit of obtuseness, can be brilliant, who can actually understand things way over potentially my own head, right? But not if I'm fully grokking it. It's not over my head then, is it? No, it's not. No. And my problems are simple ones. I'm open about. I'm bad with names. I have a pretty good memory, but I get things mixed up because of my dyslexia. It's part of dyslexia is phonetics, guys. The forming of the sounds and the differentiations between them. So yeah, it creates issues. But does that mean if I wanted to get a degree in philosophy that I couldn't? No, I absolutely could. I 100% know that I could. And that's a degree that's generally considered as a master's degree, basically. It's not the same thing as other undergrad courses. Now, most of my philosophical beliefs have been based on religious scholarships. There are different things like that. I definitely go with the humanistic philosophers as well. Last week we talked a lot about Nietzsche. This week we're talking about Jung and Baudrillard. Nietzsche's coming back around on this, guys. Trust me. But yeah, like we need to get away from this mindset of the cathedral, right? Get away from this mindset of the expert. Get away from this mindset of the gatekeepers, because they're not keeping the gates, guys. What they're doing is they're keeping the profane from actualizing themselves. They're keeping the profane from being able to have power in their lives, from having powerful lives that are impactful to people, from embodying their inner man, their self, externally to the world. That's what they're doing. And it's done for power. It's always done for power. And you could make the argument, well, Bill, don't they just let anybody in academia today? Yeah, they do. But they don't publish just anyone, and they don't put people at the top who are dumb. But they do put people at the top who have their belief systems. It's cronyism, right? Happens all the time. It's just a part of our world. And it's an immoral part of our world. And which is why I'm always speaking to you about morals, because we don't have them. We have some confusion in them. And that needs to cease.
Is simulation, insofar as it is opposed to representation. Representation stems from the principle of the equivalence of the sign and of the real. Even if this equivalence is utopian, it is a fundamental axiom. Simulation, on the contrary, stems from the utopia of the principle of equivalence, from the radical negation of the sign as value, from the sign as the reversion and death sentence of every reference. Whereas representation attempts to absorb simulation by interpreting it as a false representation, simulation envelops the whole edifice of representation itself as a simulacrum. Such would be the successive phases of the image. It is the reflection of a profound reality. It masks and denatures a profound reality. It masks the absence of a profound reality. It has no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacrum.
All right. I'm actually going to leave it, even though there's a couple more minutes in that. I'm going to leave it there because I do want to get out of here. So hopefully I will stay on target next week. I have some cool things in store this Tuesday. We're going to kind of, again, talk about some of the things around this. We're going to talk about physics. So, we're going to watch some TV, guys. Watch some TV on Tuesday. Come join me at dinner time. Turkey dinners all around on me. Anyways, here's what he was saying. In Succession, it is a reflection of a profound reality, meaning it has depth and substance and is truth. It masks and denatures a profound reality. So it gets one step removed. It masks the absence of a profound reality. We're living in that for sure. That there was a profound reality that all the simulacra are masking, right? It has no relation to any reality whatsoever. It is its own pure simulacrum. In the first case, the image is a good appearance. Representation is of the sentimental order. In the second, it is an evil appearance. It is of the order of malfeasance. In the third, it plays at being an appearance, meaning it kind of teases at it, right? It is of the order of sorcery. In the fourth, it is no longer of the order of appearance, but of simulation. The transmission from signs that dissimulate something to signs that dissimulate that there is nothing marks a decisive turning point. The first reflects a theology of truth and secrecy to which the notion of ideology still belongs. So the first reflects the theology of truth and secrecy to which the notion of ideology still belongs. Yeah. The second inaugurates the era of simulacra and simulation, in which there is no longer a God to recognize his own, no longer a last judgment to separate the false from the true. Right? If God's dead, then there is no judgment. So what is true or false? Do you understand what he's saying here? The real from its artificial resurrection, as everything is already dead and resurrected in advance. When the real is no longer what it was, nostalgia assumes its full meaning. Nostalgia means that you are homesick. Nos, nosos actually, means sick, diseased. And I forget the root of nostalgia, but it literally means that you are sick. You are longing for home. Something that doesn't affect most people these days, but certainly affects little children. There is a plethora of myths of origin and signs of reality, a plethora of truth, of secondary objectivity and authenticity, escalation of the true, a lived experience, resurrection of the figurative, where the object and substance have disappeared, panic stricken production of the real and of the referential, parallel and greater than the panic of material production. This is how simulation appears in the phase which concerns us, a strategy of the real, of the neo-real, of the hyper-real, that everywhere is the double of the strategy of deterrence. We're going to leave that there. Again, I told you it might be a multi-parter, but hey, that's how it goes, guys. How it goes with me. I like to talk. I appreciate that you like to listen. You can do that on YouTube, Rumble, DLive, and Entropy. Please go to the Rumble and subscribe there if you haven't, because if YouTube decides to give me a warning or a strike, or I already have a warning and a strike, sorry. YouTube decides to give me another strike, I can't stream on YouTube, because if I say anything or they decide to randomly pull any of my videos, my whole channel will be gone. And that, I'm at risk of that all the time because I have so much material. I have several hundred videos I've made in the last 2 years because Bill's been at work, man. But I'm working at it. And because of that, because of my hard work efforts, I feel like I've fell into my niche in this, and I've gotten better, and so the content, the material is going to continue to grow and become better, and eventually, as I did earlier, I played. Um, but guys, it is kind of incumbent that you all do that. I 100% want to get back to the Dystopia Now channel in the future. I will. It's just a matter of my own time and resources, of course, as always, as always. Maybe I'll write this book and it'll be a really big hit, and I will come into some sort of wealth. I more or less expect that it will not be recognized until well after I'm gone. But you got to take your shot, man. You got to roll your dice, and I would really love to do all kinds of creative content with all kinds of things like this, but I want it to be, um, original. I don't want to just be copying everyone else, right? I want to be doing things different because I am my own unique individual. And I think we should all be doing that. One of the problems I see in political YouTube is the parroting. And it's always a problem, right? It's not like I've never parroted in my life. So, but I don't want to be parroting the same talking points. And it isn't like that we were all coming out with a list of talking points. It's that the analogies are so apt that everyone ends up using them. And oftentimes they're coming to those conclusions separately. But most importantly, I want to bring unique things, unique ideas to the world. Or at least if they're not wholly unique, because I don't know if there is any true thing that can be fully unique and created, but maybe there is. If they're not wholly so, then at least I can perhaps take out some of the interference, some of the distractions, some of the things that keep us blind. So, anyways, guys, with all that, this has been All Minus One. My name is Bill, and I wish you all well.
Power is in inflicting pain and humiliation. Power is in tearing human minds to pieces and putting them together again in new shapes of your own choosing. Do you begin to see then what kind of world we are creating? It is the exact opposite of the stupid hedonistic utopias that the old reformers imagined. A world of fear and treachery and torment, a world of trampling and being trampled upon, a world which will grow not less but more merciless as it refines itself. Progress in our world will be progress toward more pain. The old civilizations claimed that they were founded on love and justice. Ours is founded upon hatred. In our world there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. Everything else we shall destroy. Everything. Already we are breaking down the habits of thought which have survived from before the revolution. We have cut the links between child and parent, and between man, and between man and woman. No one dares trust a wife or a child or a friend any longer. But in the future there will be no wives and no friends. Children will be taken from their mothers at birth, as one takes eggs from a hen. The sex instinct will be eradicated. Procreation will be an annual formality, like the renewal of a ration card. We shall abolish the orgasm. Our neurologists are at work upon it now. There will be no loyalty except loyalty toward the boy. There will be no love except the love of Big Brother. There will be no laughter except a laugh of triumph over a defeated enemy. There will be no art, no literature, no science. When we are omnipotent, we shall have no more need of science. There will be no distinction between beauty and ugliness. There will be no curiosity, no employment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
Citizens, welcome to the archive. Being the year 2084, we all love and know the greatness and perfection of our dystopia. As such, we all have a grand duty to continue in our great endeavor. Those of us who are looking after you wish to provide a history of our society, as well as a step-by-step guide for achieving the goals of totalitarianism that led to such levels of human perfection. Welcome to Dystopia Now.